So, welcome to Microservices and Modularity talk. You all developers, right? How many of you use Linux or have to log into a Linux console? Just one? Wow. You have any idea what that means in Linux?
Yes.
Okay. That basically shows you the process ID of any process that is run by Java. And that's a pretty simple Unix command if you look into it. Or is it? Let's think about what it actually does. It has to go find all the processes, then has to figure out which of those processes were started by Java, then figure out what are their PIDs, and then display it to you. So it's not that simple. In fact, it does this. And actually, you can argue that you don't need this application because you can do the exact same thing using something like that. And in fact, if you look into it, it's going to print pretty much the same result. So what's the difference? You're either using monoliths or microservices. If you ever done anything like that, congratulations, you've used microservices. You can tweet about it. OK, sarcasm is enough, but I kind of hope that you already get where I'm going here. So if you expect a talk that someone's going to tell you how microservices are great, that's not that room. But let's talk about microservices for a while. So what are microservices? Well, I wish I knew, actually, honestly. And so far, I haven't found anything that I call that someone will say is a description of what microservices is. Well, the best thing I found is this blog post article by Martin Fowler and James Lewis, and they basically describe these characteristics. So they basically say, whoever does microservices, they do those things. Okay. And if you look into that, that actually makes sense. The tricky part here is, if you actually look into that very careful, you'll realize that roughly half of this is related to development to the software development process. The other half of it is basically operations, right? Which is not bad, but it's not a concept of how you build your software, but rather how you build and run your software, which is, of course, what the whole DevOps thing is about. So that said, why you would like to use microservices? Well, one thing that I often hear is to reduce the complexity of a monolith. And by reducing the complexity, people mean a whole bunch of different things. But basically, you'll see the general idea is that the monoliths are getting bigger and bigger and more complex to maintain. So we split them into microservices, and it's going to be much better. OK, so here are your microservices, whatever you decided to use, like your code. Well, you need to run them, so you're going to need some of those things. Either run it directly in something like Jetty or Undertow, or use Spring Boot, or whatever is the newest, greatest thing out there. Well, then you need to run it on some actually machine, and in most cases, it's going to be some kind of virtualization, whether that's going to be Docker or VM or whatever. Well, obviously, there are different levels of virtualization. And obviously, there is the cloud, so you don't have to deal with this stuff. Just go on Amazon, pay them some money, they do all the thing for you. So pretty easy. And then you need to kind of put these services to play together. So end up using things like a bunch of the tools that Netflix guys have developed, or Kubernetes, or anything like that. Then you have to aggregate logs and do a bunch of other things. So a bunch of other tools come into play. And that's it. You've just reduced the complexity of your application. Congratulations. OK. The same blog post, the same article from Martin Fowler and James Lewis, they say one very important thing if you read it carefully. By doing that, if you don't do it right, what you're doing is you're shifting complexity from one place to another. And that new place, it's a far more difficult to track that complexity. Like your complexity now is not in your application, it's in your infrastructure. And that makes it a lot harder for you to go and track it and figure out what's going on there. But everyone is doing microservices these days, so what's the cool thing about them? OK, few quotes. You can briefly read them and tell me if you agree with that. Well, you all are familiar with microservices, or it's just, want to know what it is? Familiar, OK. So you agree with those? Roughly, yeah. OK? Makes sense, right? Agree? OK. Yep, that's true. You can Google that. Those are quotes from articles about EJB 1 and 2, back from '99 and 2002. That's how new microservices are. OK, and back in the old days, there was this article, which doesn't exist anymore, but luckily there was a Wayback Machine so you can find it, which is a report by Gartner, which said back in the old days when there were this application server, the whole EJB boom, and how that's the only thing that people should use, companies overspent billions of dollars because vendors made them use the technology they don't really need it. That was back then. Now, today is a whole different story, right? It's not the case. It's not that some companies are into the cloud business and you doing microservices is very convenient for them, right? That's not the case. OK, so let's go back into microservices and ask the question of who is using microservices. Well, those guys are, and there wouldn't, if you find any presentation about microservices that does not mention Netflix, let me know. So obviously, Netflix is the biggest player out there, the loudest about microservices anyway. But a bunch of other companies are also reporting that. So let's look into those companies carefully. What do they have in common?
Their product. Scale.
Their what? Scale? Yeah. OK. That's true, but I think the most important thing that they have in common is they're building services for their own use. They don't build products they sell to someone else. They don't go support their customers by selling them microservices. They do it for themselves. What does that mean? Is they are able to change their culture and adapt to the decisions they've made. Right? And that's great. That's the whole DevOps culture and so forth, and I'm all for it. But if you're in the business of building software for someone else, you don't just go to someone else's company and say, guys, we're going to build this great thing for you. The only thing is you have to change your company culture. Right? That doesn't work. I've tried it. Doesn't work. OK. So another thing from that article is that you look at the big guys and the big, bright brains there, and you think, oh, wow, they do it, so we can do it. Right? Well, it's not always the case. It's not always that whatever the smarter guys and the greater teams can do, a smaller team and not that smart guys can do. So you need just to realize what are your abilities and kind of adapt to that. And that brings us to the question, should you use microservices or not? The question actually is your organization like them? Are you like them? If that's where you work, if that's the company that you want to build microservices for, if you can make everyone around you is willing to change the culture and go that way, then probably yes. If you can make it, you build it, you run it, then great. What if you can't? What options then you have? And also those guys will tell you that in general, it's not something that you should do. In general, you should not start with microservices. You should start with a monolith and keep it modular. And then when the time arrives, when everyone is on the same page and the need is there and everything is like supporting you in the movement into microservices, then when you have a modular, something modular, you can actually move into that direction. So, what else if not microservices? And this is where the disappointment shows up, because, oh gosh, I can't use microservices. So, don't worry, microservices are not the cure. It's not a magic thing. It's not like you do microservices and all the problems goes away. It doesn't work that way. In fact, not only that microservices doesn't cure complexity, nothing does. The complexity of the application comes largely, apart from bad code, largely from the complexity of your domain model. You're not building a software like out of nowhere. You're following a domain model. If you're building a banking software, there are rules in that industry that applies to you. If you're building whatever telecommunication software, there are rules in that industry that applies to you. And those rules are the ones that introduce complexity. And they will always do, because that's the way it is. So you need to be aware of the fact that you're not going to change the complexity of the domain model. You can deal with it, right? And that's the difference between cure and treatment. There is no solution for complexity, but there is treatment. You can learn to live with that. You can understand that complexity and manage it. You cannot solve it. You cannot make it disappear. And microservices have nothing to do with that. So, a good treatment for complexity is modularity. If your architecture is modular, it doesn't matter whether it's microservices or not, you can deal with complexity in a much better ways than if you just throw random code. In fact, there is a guy called Bob Martin. Anyone heard of him? Yeah. Uncle Bob. Uncle Bob says something like this: there is no such thing as microservices architecture. Microservices are a deployment option. And keep that in mind, and I'll second that. Microservices are a deployment option. If your application is modular, you have the option to deploy it as a microservices. But what you design is a modular application and not a microservices application. Okay? And every time I do this, people give me this look like some one of you have here. I was like, yeah, right. But in my project, this is basically impossible because, here this and here that. So, yeah, I'm not going to just talk about microservices. I'm going to actually show you. And I hope this is going to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the, let me go here, and grab this application. This is Duke's web store, or Duke's what's called Forest, a bunch of applications created by Sun and now Oracle to demo Java Enterprise. So that's basically how it works. The diagram. So you have a bunch of things, REST, SOAP, pretty much everything that Java Enterprise gives you. And of course, this works on Glassfish. You can't even compile that thing without having Glassfish. But doesn't matter. So we take this application and see what we can do with it. So let's see. Do I have my Glassfish running? I hope I do. It's not that browser. Come on. Don't play jokes on me right now. OK, here we go. So that's the application. Basically, you can see you have the home page, products. You can see you can buy. You can log in as administrator. Not that administrator. Like this way. And then you have a bunch of options. Doesn't matter. By the way, I'm going to be really going through some code in very, very fast way. Everything's online. You will see the links. So you can go ahead and follow that later on your own speed, because I don't really have the time to do that here. But basically, this is the application we're dealing with. OK, so, and now, someone comes to you. Let's assume for a second that's application your company built. And you have it, right? And the company is willing to build a new product that's going to be only product catalog. And this guy from other department comes to you and says, OK, you know what? We know that you have this application that already has a product catalog, so we want to use it, right, for this new thing that we're building. And you say, what do you say? Oh, here's the code, the source code. Go grab it, right? OK, so he goes and grabs it, and I'm this guy, and I have no clue about how that thing is built. OK, so what I do is I use some tools. Let me go here. Sorry. So I have a tool called JDepend. Well, it's not my tool. It's publicly available. And I run this report. And it generates me some nice image like this. And it tells me how basically this application is structured. And I look at it as like, what the hell is that? OK, so I have a bunch of packages that are kind of wired together. And where is the catalog? And which part I need to take from that? That's a pretty small application, by the way. Imagine that on a real enterprise scale. So where is the catalog? There is EJB, but there's a util, and they both link to each other, and they're, all right, never mind. Spend a couple of days figuring the whole thing out and start refactoring. So here's how it goes. So I'll do this. This is a script I have written. And basically what it does is it checks out from Git some commits that I have, and then runs a diff, so you can see what has changed through the code. And I'm going to go really quick through that. So that's the first thing. Move the domain. I'm sorry, it goes bottom up, as in Git. So we have these entity classes there we found. So we did just rename this, so made them really entity classes. Then, of course, update the references. Then we'll extract something like a generic model from those entities, and move the domain model into separate module. So how that works? Come on, here. OK, so here is the diff. So as you can see, now we have a new module called the domain model. And right down here is what used to be their entities thing, which if I look into it, say person class, you will see that this was already with all the annotations about persistence and everything. So that's what they used as a model. Well, basically, they assumed that no one ever will ever want to use any other persistent technology. So we don't want that. So basically, we change this to a person entity that is doing, obviously, all the persistent stuff, but it extends a thing called person, for example. And that thing is a separate module. So we have it here. So that's a Java Pojo class. That's model. You can use it for whatever you want. You can persist it any way you want. It's not dependent on anything. It's just a model. So that's the first change we do. OK, and then we go next. We're going to create a few other modules. OK, so what we do next is I'll really need to rush now in order to fit in that time. Basically, we extract some use cases. And those use cases are Maven modules. We just move some logic into some use cases. And this is the catalog use case, the e-commerce, identity. Those are parts of this application. So we just extracted the code into separate modules. OK? So let's hope it's going to work again. OK, it opens something for editing. Anyway, so that's the next thing is we just move this Duke store into separate modules. We create these entities, remove these entities, and create now an explicit module for persistence for JPA. And obviously some changes to the POM. What we do next is we moved the applications and all the layers into their representative modules. So now we have here the Duke shipment, events, and so forth. And also we have this our use cases keep going like the same way. And finally, update some dependencies that move those modules into submodules, so reorganizing the Maven structure, basically. OK, so you will see that when I do Maven install, we'll see that, well, apart from those 4 modules that we had in the beginning, now we're going to have a lot more modules that are nicely separated into functionalities. And you can actually tell what those modules are doing, right? So now you have catalog management and so forth. And if you now run, again, the let me do it maybe like this. The report again. So this is how your structure looks right now. This was how it was before, right? So that's how much you could understand earlier. Now you look into that, and all you see that you have 3 use cases here. That's catalog, e-commerce, and identity. There is a common persistence module that works on those use cases. And also, you have some wiring modules that are wiring those things into whatever your architecture is. That's EJB in that particular case. And then you have the web application layer that is using those wiring things to go through the whole process down to the use cases. OK? So now this guy wants to do the catalog thing, and he needs to get the catalog part, which is here. So what he can do is he can just go and create a microservice out of it based on Spring Boot in this particular case. OK? And if you know Spring Boot, that's pretty simple. If you don't, well, you'll have to learn it yourself. But basically, it's just writing a bunch of classes, and that's it. You create another module. So let's compile this thing again. Oh, I didn't show you, but just so that you're sure, this thing should still work. Yeah. So the fact that we redesigned the application does not change the fact that everything that was on Glassfish, EJB, blah, 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 stopped working. We just refactor it in a different way. OK? And so if you now look again into the report, now you see what we have done is basically we just created the microservice that is using a different type of wiring to the same use case. So we reuse the catalog thing, just wire it together because we have different means of storing data or using those data, and use it in something else that is essentially a microservice. Let's see how that works. Actually, I also installed something here like JSON doc. I didn't start it, so sorry. So we need to let's already create a new one here. So it's going to be catalog microservice target. So it's going to generate a jar file for us. So Java jar catalog microservice jar. So this is going to start the whole Spring Boot thing. And you will see that we can actually use REST services to connect to this JSON doc, hopefully. Here we go. That's always when you're in a rush, something's going to go wrong. Obviously. OK. So now you can create a category. You can create a product. Yeah, I'm not going to go through that, but that's basically REST something. OK, wow, you have a microservice now. And that was made possible only by refactoring an existing application. So, is that the way it's supposed to go? Let me show you something else, and you tell me what you think about it. And that's the next thing, is I'm going to convert all my jar files into OSGI bundles. Wow, scary word, OSGI. Now everyone's like, whoa, what? Don't do that. OK, that's how hard it is. All you need to do to convert your jar files into OSGI bundles is adding this thing to your POM. Basically telling them that they need to add some more information into the jar file. That's it. You're done. So now that you have your bundles, what we can do is we can provide an OSGI shell service and also an OSGI service and also an OSGI command. Let's see how that works. OSGI service is nothing but a wiring thing for the OSGI. It still uses the use cases that we created. Okay, and then we have a command, and I'll show you what the command do. So let's build this again. I'm just gonna do package this time, and I'm gonna go and stop glassfish because I don't need it anymore. Okay. I'm just going to start this in the meantime. OK, where we were. OK, so you see we created a bunch of other projects in OSGI. So let's go and start those. There is a Felix framework, which is an implementation of OSGI. So let me clear the cache and start it. OK, and let's bundles. So you see we have this catalog management something here. We have model. We have the catalog service. It's now all beautifully inside OSGI. And also we created a command. So the command is product list. OK, no product. So let's do product add test with description of test. And it costs 12 something. OK, and then we have product list, and here we go. Now we're writing applications in a console. Wow, how fancy. But what you care about is, REST, right? That's everyone cares about. OK, let's do that. Next thing. Hey, sorry. OK, we're going to create a REST endpoint in OSGI. How complicated that is, here you go. It's just a Jigsaw REST service, like something you would do in Java. It doesn't differ in any other way. OK, let's build that thing. OK, live starting in the meantime. OK, so I didn't on purpose install on the Felix the feature that auto redeploys every time a jar file is added. So I can demo a few other things later on. So I need to stop Felix right now, clean the cache, and start it again, and see how fast it starts, actually. And now, in here, I have this other thing called another REST API. That's for the product that we have in OSGI. And see that here we don't have anything right now. So yeah, that's Felix. So let me do, this is, by the way, stored in memory. That's why it disappears every time I restart. OK, just to convince you that it works. Here we go. So now I have an application that is both available as a REST service, and it also has a command line interface. Isn't that cool? I mean, my admins would love that. SSH, do some stuff, break the whole thing down. Yeah. OK, so what we can do next, actually. Sorry, that's Felix. Wrong place. We're going to create a portlet. Another scary word. Okay. And now I know everyone hates portlets, but that's my business. I'm in a portlet world. So let's see how complicated it is to create a portlet. Well, if you use LifeRay, it's as complicated as creating this one file, because LifeRay is all OSGI based now. So basically, you just create an OSGI component, and you say that it's in a portlet, and that's it. That's the whole thing you need to do. And once you do this, here we go. Now we're going to have a portlet in our application, in our build, somewhere here. Here we go, catalog portlet. So let's see how that works. I had LifeRay running somewhere here. Let me log in. And I obviously typed the wrong password. Here we go. Let me create a page. Okay. Let's make it like a single column. Okay, and I'll add my portlet. That's my portlet right here, newly created. Well, doesn't have to display anything because we don't have any data, but we have the OSGI command. So, but I don't have anything LifeRay here and as a console. So how can I add this? Well, here is how. OSGI has this neat feature. Sorry, not here. Here. This neat feature that allows you to go to the GoGo shell or OSGI shell remotely. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just telnet into LifeRay directly, and I'm going to have the same thing I have in Felix. So if I list bundles here, you see that, well, not like in Felix, we have a lot more bundles here. But still, you see the catalog portlet here, commands, and so forth. So I can say, again, product, add, test, from LifeRay, and it costs 34 something. And here we go. Right? So now I have not only the REST service, I also have a portlet, and I also have a console application, and they all work on top of the same use case that I extracted from a legacy Java Enterprise application. Okay. What you're going to say next is, how the hell that has something to do with microservices? All you do is single instance, right? Not exactly. Let's play a bit and add a few things. Okay, that's not here, where I was, here. So what I'm going to do here is, the two commits are important. The one is quick fix around Jackson, so you can ignore that. But basically, the important part here is this thing. I'm getting this product service, and what I'm saying here is I'm adding a property. And I'm saying that this OSGI service is also available remotely. That's all I need to do, is just tell OSGI that this service can be available from somewhere else. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to add, oops, sorry. Yeah, you didn't see this, but also there was in this same commit, I just missed it, a few jar files that are responsible for discovery and things like that, right? That's the other thing that was there in that commit, 4 jar files. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to stop for a while Felix, clean the cache, let it be. Okay, and not here. If I go to this one here, now it should be empty again, because it will be once I run it. Come on, not this one, this one. Okay, so let's rebuild the thing. OK, and it should be empty again now, because it stores everything in memory, as I said. Now, let me go again to the telnet thing. Where was it? I'm now telnetting again into the OSGI. Let's see, what is this bundle? OSGI catalog service, it's number 178. So I'm going to stop that. Number 178. Here we go. And what do you think is going to happen now? It didn't crash because we created the application with assuming that everything is dynamic, assuming that everything that we use can at a certain point of time go away. And when that happens, we just display this, say, hey, you know what, right now we don't have data for you, but as soon as it comes back, we'll show it to you. So whenever I say start 178, now I'm doing explicit stop and stop, but that's the same thing as if that service crashed, right? So now you again have, well, no data, right? Let's add something real quick. OK, so let me now stop that service again. So there is no data, as you see, from Liferay. It's coffee time. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to Felix. That's a different application, right? Completely different thing running outside of anything. Just make sure I clean the cache again and start it. Here we go. That's it. And now let's do this. OK. Didn't it start? Yeah. It does. OK. Where am I? Am I running out of time? Yes, I am. OK, I'm just going to remove it just to make sure. That's frame catalog service jar. Yes. OK, just to make sure. OK, I obviously did something wrong again. Don't have the time to investigate it now, so you're going to have to trust me. That actually what happens there is the OSGI framework has a few bundles that allows you to do remote services. So it's basically going to figure out that there is another service running on somewhere else. It's going to do all the discovery for you. Well, it's not that she's going to do it for you. You still have to tell it how you want to do the discovery and so forth. But like the code is there, and going to use it for serving that from a different resource, from a different environment in general. OK, I need to wrap up. I have a few more slides. So what happened is, and again, as I said, I rushed through this, really. So I don't expect you that you understand everything. But all the slides, everything is online. The slides, the code is on GitHub. So you can go step by step and see exactly what was done here. What was done is we started with this. We had a glassfish with 3 modules. A module in the middle that was called model, but in fact was assuming a persistence, given persistence. And we move it into something like that. So now we have the domain model that everything works around that. Then we have the use cases. And then we have around that different controllers or tools that interact to this. And finally, we have the display thing outside, which is either JSF and Glassfish, or Spring Boot and microservices, or even Liferay as a portal, whatever that is. That's what we made. And this allows us to do this. This is deployment on Glassfish. It uses CJBs, whatever. Now, this is the same thing, but is on Spring Boot. Why? The same thing with the OSGI runtime. And the same thing in a portal environment. We didn't have to reinvent the wheel of the core logic of our applications. These two circles in the center, they didn't change. The whole logic of everything is still there. We just changed the way we access this information. Okay, I wish I was able to tell you that I'm so smart and I made this up myself, but that's not the case, obviously. That's a very well-known thing called clean architecture. And so if you do things like this, if you design your applications in a clean way, it doesn't matter whether you use microservices or not. Well, it matters from deployment perspective, right? It matters from maybe maintenance perspective, whatever. But it's not the clue that you have to build microservices in order to have this. You have clean architecture first, and then you decide how you deploy it. So the reason I mention OSGI is because our architecture of choice, we do that a lot at Liferay, and we investigated all the options for going microservices and going OSGI. And the reason for that is, if you look at the characteristics of microservices and OSGI, they're very much the same. You can basically do the same thing that you can do with microservices. And also, the last thing I want to tell you is this is not a theory. This Liferay is a product with, you can see here, about 5 million lines of code. It's one of the biggest portals out there. We're basically competing with companies like Microsoft and Oracle and those guys. So this is not a joke. It's a really big project. And we're doing this right now. We're shifting from like monolith. Well, it wasn't monolith because technically portals are giving you some dynamism. But we're moving into OSGI so that we can actually do those things in more efficient ways. So go ahead and try it. Thank you.